The rain fell in a slow, relentless drizzle, a silent mourner over the grieving town of Silverbrook. A sea of black-clad figures stood in neat rows, their heads bowed, faces pale beneath the heavy sky. The funeral was unlike any other, not just because of the man being laid to rest, but because of the restless creature beside his coffin. A large German shepherd sat at the foot of the mahogany casket, his ears pinned back, eyes darting wildly as if searching for something unseen. His fur, usually sleek and well-kept, bristled with unease. His breathing was erratic, sharp pants of distress. He whimpered, pawing at the polished wood, claws scraping against the varnish. Shadow had been Captain Henry Lawson's partner in the force for 7 years. They had been inseparable, the kind of pair that understood each other without words. The dog had taken bullets for him, sniffed out danger before it struck, and sat by his side in moments of silence when words wouldn't do. And now, his master was gone. Michael Lawson watched from the other side of the grave. His fingers curled into fists, nails pressing into his palms. He had barely spoken since the moment they had told him. The words had seemed unreal at first, a cruel mistake. A heart attack, they said. In his office, alone. No one had seen it coming, no warnings, no symptoms. A healthy man, in his prime, struck down as if by some invisible hand. It didn't sit right. Michael had spent the past few nights replaying his last conversation with his father. It had been brief, almost forgettable. "Be careful," Henry had said. Michael had laughed it off. Why wouldn't he be? It wasn't until later that he realized the weight in his father's voice, the way he had held onto the doorframe before leaving, as if there was something more he wanted to say but couldn't. Shadow let out a low growl, snapping Michael out of his thoughts. The dog's body tensed, muscles coiling like a spring. He barked once, twice, sharp and urgent. A few mourners gasped. The priest hesitated mid-sentence. Michael stepped forward, kneeling beside the animal, running a hand down his back. The fur bristled beneath his fingers. "Easy, boy," he murmured. But Shadow did not calm. His paws scrabbled against the ground, his head whipping back and forth, his nose pressed to the coffin as if expecting something, someone, to respond. The funeral director approached hesitantly. "Perhaps we should." Shadow barked again, louder, the sound cutting through the somber air like a knife. Michael's mother, Eleanor, wiped at her swollen eyes, her voice raw. "He's grieving. Just let him be." But this wasn't grief. It was something else entirely. The ceremony pushed forward, the priest's voice resuming, though it was thinner now, distracted. Dirt hit the wooden coffin in slow, deliberate drop. Shadow let out a whine so sorrowful it made Michael's throat tighten. The crowd began to thin. Officers from the Silverbrook Police Department stepped forward, one by one, to place their badges atop the grave, a final sign of respect for the man who had once led them. Michael remained rooted in place, watching the coffin disappear beneath layers of soil. Still, Shadow did not move. Michael reached for his collar, giving a gentle tug. "Come on, boy. It's over." The dog resisted. He let out a low, vibrating growl, his muscles rigid. Michael felt it then, the same unease that had been gnawing at him since the moment he got the news. It coiled in his gut, a quiet whisper that something wasn't right. He scanned the faces around him. Officers who had served under his father stood in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones. Some avoided his gaze. Others nodded politely but kept their distance. Detective Gerald Hayes, one of his father's oldest friends, clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. His grip was firm, reassuring. "I know this is hard, kid," he said, voice gruff from years of whiskey and cigars. "Henry was one of the best." Michael swallowed, nodding stiffly. "Yeah." A long silence stretched between them. Hayes' expression shifted, hesitation, or maybe something closer to guilt. He glanced at the grave, then back at Michael. "There's a lot your father never told you," he muttered under his breath. Michael's heart skipped. He turned sharply. "What do you mean?" But Hayes was already stepping back, shaking his head as if he had said too much. "Take care of your mother," he said. "And keep an eye on that dog." Michael watched as he walked away, disappearing into the sea of mourners. Shadow whined again. Michael knelt, pressing his forehead against the dog's. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered. Shadow huffed, his breath warm against Michael's cheek. Then, without warning, he bolted, ripping free from Michael's grasp and darting toward the freshly covered grave. He lunged, paws digging into the dirt, clawing frantically as if trying to unearth something buried beneath. Michael's stomach twisted. A fresh wave of murmurs spread through the remaining crowd. His mother gasped, stepping back. "Michael, get him away from there!" But Michael couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, watching Shadow's frenzied desperation, a terrifying thought took root in his mind, one he couldn't ignore. What if his father wasn't supposed to be in that coffin at all? The night after the funeral, Michael lay awake in his childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Rain lashed against the window, a rhythmic tap-tap-tap that should have been soothing, but instead it crawled under his skin. Shadow lay curled at the foot of his bed, his ears twitching, his body tense even in sleep. Every so often, he let out a soft whimper, his paws jerking as if chasing something in a dream or running from it. Michael turned onto his side, exhaling sharply. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling all day, the same gnawing unease that had settled in his gut ever since they lowered the coffin into the ground. Shadow's behavior wasn't just grief, it was something else. The way he had clawed at the grave, the way his entire body had screamed protest, as if the very act of burying Henry Lawson was a mistake. A chill crawled up Michael's spine. He could still hear Detective Hayes' words from earlier. "There's a lot your father never told you." His phone buzzed on the nightstand, making him flinch. The screen glowed in the darkness, an unknown number. For a moment, he hesitated, his thumb hovering over the answer button. Then, something in his gut told him to pick up. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Hello?" A beat of silence. Then, a voice, hushed and urgent. "You need to open the coffin." Michael bolted upright. "Who is this?" The caller didn't answer. Just a sharp inhale, then a single, whispered warning. "They lied to you." The line went dead. Michael's pulse thundered in his ears. He yanked the phone away, staring at the screen as if it could give him answers. He dialed back, but the number was disconnected. Shadow lifted his head, ears perked. He let out a low, questioning whine. Michael's mind raced. His father's death had been so sudden, so clean. No autopsy. No questions. Just a heart attack, a closed casket, a funeral wrapped up in a bow. Too clean. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his thoughts spiraling. He wasn't a child anymore, he was a cop. He had been trained to see the inconsistencies, the gaps in a story where the truth should be. And right now there were too many. His father had always been meticulous, always aware of his surroundings. How did a man like that, healthy, cautious, still in his prime, just die in his office with no one around? And why had Shadow, a dog trained to detect distress, refused to leave his side even after death? Michael clenched his jaw. There was only one way to know for sure. The next morning, he arrived at the Silverbrook Police Department, his uniform stiff on his shoulders, his badge heavier than usual. The station felt different without his father there, quieter, colder, as if something vital had been stripped away. He made his way to the archives, past rows of file cabinets until he reached the death records. The cause of death report was exactly as he remembered. Cardiac arrest. Signed off by the town coroner, Dr. Langley. But something was missing. His father's medical history had never indicated heart problems. In fact, Henry Lawson had been required to take annual physicals as part of department regulations. His most recent one, just 3 months prior, had cleared him with flying colors. Michael's stomach twisted. He took a steadying breath and made his way to Dr. Langley's office, pushing open the door without knocking. The coroner looked up from his desk, startled. A wiry man in his 60s, Langley had the tired eyes of someone who had spent too much time with the dead. "Michael," he greeted warily. "What brings you here?" Michael didn't bother with pleasantries. "I have some questions about my father's death." Langley sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I understand this is difficult, but Henry's passing was—" "Explain to me why there was no autopsy," Michael interrupted. Langley hesitated. "Because it wasn't necessary." The cause was clear. "No, it wasn't." Michael stepped forward, voice tightening. "You signed off on a heart attack for a man with no history of cardiac issues. A man who was fine the day before. And now I find out there was no official examination? Just a closed casket and a rushed burial." Langley swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Michael, let it go." Michael's blood ran cold. That was the moment he knew. His father hadn't died of natural causes. Something else had happened. Something people were trying to keep buried. Michael's hands curled into fists. "Who made the call to forego the autopsy?" Langley looked away. A new kind of tension filled the room. Then, quietly, the coroner muttered, "Chief Reynolds." Michael felt the floor shift beneath him. Chief Reynolds had been his father's second-in-command for years, a man his father had trusted. The same man who had stood by his side at the funeral, offering condolences, speaking of Henry Lawson's legacy. The same man who had ensured the casket stayed closed. Michael turned sharply, pushing out of the office without another word. He needed to think. He needed to act. Shadow was waiting by the patrol car when Michael stepped outside, tail stiff, ears flicking at every small sound. The dog was watching him, waiting for him to understand what he already knew. Michael opened the car door. "Come on, boy." Shadow leapt in without hesitation. The cemetery was empty when they arrived. The sky was gray, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. Michael's heart pounded as he approached the grave. He wasn't supposed to be doing this, but he also wasn't supposed to bury a man who wasn't meant to be dead. Michael stared at the ground, at the fresh layer of dirt, at the spot where his father's coffin lay beneath. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled. And then, with steady resolve, he reached for his phone and dialed a number. When the line picked up, he spoke 4 words that sent a chill through his own bones. "I need an exhumation order." The moment the first shovelful of dirt was removed from the grave, a suffocating silence settled over the cemetery. The diggers moved efficiently, their faces unreadable, but Michael felt the weight of every second pressing down on him. Shadow sat rigidly beside him, his ears flicking with every scrape of metal against earth, his deep amber eyes locked on the spot where the coffin lay. Michael had expected resistance, had prepared for it, even. But when he had walked into Chief Reynolds' office that morning and demanded an exhumation order, the reaction had been colder than he anticipated. "You're out of line, Lawson," Reynolds had said, leaning back in his chair, his expression impassive. "Your father was a damn good man. Don't tarnish his memory with conspiracy theories." Michael had met his gaze evenly. "Then let me be wrong." The chief had sighed, shaking his head, but in the end, he had given the order. Not out of support, Michael could see that much, but because refusing it outright would only raise more suspicion. Now, as the last layer of dirt was pulled away, the heavy coffin was finally revealed. The wooden surface was slick with moisture, the edges darkened by the damp earth. The funeral director stepped forward hesitantly, hands trembling as he adjusted his gloves. "This is highly irregular," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Michael barely heard him. His heartbeat roared in his ears, his breath shallow. This was it, the moment that would either prove his gut right or make him the fool who had disturbed his own father's rest for nothing. The hinges groaned as the lid was pried open. The sound was slow, stretching out like a taut wire ready to snap. Michael's stomach clenched. And then the lid fell back. The coffin was empty. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd gathered. Someone swore under their breath. Michael's knees nearly buckled. No body. No remains. Just a neatly folded police uniform and his father's badge, gleaming under the dim light. Shadow let out a sharp bark, his fur bristling. Michael could barely breathe. This has to be a mistake, the funeral director stammered, his face drained of color. I was there when the body was placed inside. Michael reached down, his fingers brushing the uniform. The fabric was crisp, as if it had been pressed just yesterday. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. Behind him, murmurs turned to speculation. The officers present exchanged glances, their faces pale with unease. Detective Hayes stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of realization. "Michael," he said quietly, pulling him aside. "You need to come with me. Now." Michael followed without question. Shadow trotted at his side, his nails clicking against the pavement as they walked toward Hayes' car. Once inside, Hayes turned to him, his jaw tight. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Whatever you think happened to your father, it's bigger than you realize." Michael's mouth was dry. "You knew." Hayes exhaled, running a hand over his face. "I suspected. But there are things I couldn't prove." He looked out the windshield, scanning the cemetery as if expecting someone to be watching. "Your father was on to something before he disappeared. He didn't trust anyone, not even me, not fully. But I know he was investigating something within the department. Something dangerous." Michael's chest tightened. "Reynolds?" Hayes hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. But your father, he was careful. If he left something behind, clues, evidence, anything, it won't be in plain sight." He turned back to Michael. "You need to start where he would. His office." Michael's mind was already racing. His father's office had been cleared out after his death, his belongings returned to the family, but if Henry Lawson had been planning something, he wouldn't have left it in the open. He needed to find whatever his father had been working on, and he needed to do it before someone stopped him. By the time Michael reached the precinct, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The station felt different as he stepped inside, too quiet, too still. A few officers glanced up as he passed, their gazes lingering for just a second too long before they turned away. Michael clenched his jaw. They knew. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to make them wary. He made his way to his father's office, now repurposed as a conference room. The desk had been emptied, the bookshelves rearranged. To any other eye, it looked like just another space. But Michael knew better. He closed the door behind him, his fingers skimming over the wood of the desk. His father had always been a creature of habit, everything in its place, nothing unnecessary. Think like him. Michael pulled open the drawers, sifting through the files that had been left behind. Nothing unusual. But then, his fingers brushed something, an uneven ridge along the bottom panel. A false bottom. His pulse quickened as he wedged his fingers beneath the lip, prying it open. A small compartment revealed itself, hidden beneath layers of wood. Inside, a single item. A USB drive. Michael swallowed hard. His hands were steady as he pulled it free. Shadow let out a soft growl. A floorboard creaked outside the office. Michael froze. He wasn't alone. Shadow's growl deepened, his body coiled like a spring. Michael slipped the drive into his pocket and turned just as the door handle twisted. The door swung open. Chief Reynolds stood in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes flickered to Michael's hand before settling on his face. "Care to explain what you're doing in here, Lawson?" Michael forced himself to stay calm. "Just remembering my father." Reynolds nodded slowly. Then, after a beat, he stepped aside. "Come with me." Michael didn't move. Reynolds sighed. "Don't make this difficult, son." Michael met his gaze, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just a conversation. He took a step forward, Shadow at his side. And as he passed Reynolds, he realized one thing with absolute certainty. The man in front of him knew exactly where Henry Lawson was. and Michael was running out of time to find him. The cold air inside Chief Reynolds' office pressed against Michael's skin like a silent warning. The blinds were drawn, the room dim except for the weak glow of the desk lamp. The scent of old leather and burnt coffee lingered in the air. Michael stood rigidly by the door, Shadow at his side, his breath slow and measured. Reynolds settled into his chair, his fingers steepled. He studied Michael with the same calculating gaze he had used at the funeral, the same unreadable mask. "You've been asking a lot of questions," he said finally. His voice was calm, even, but Michael could hear the weight behind it. Michael kept his expression neutral. "Just trying to understand what happened to my father." Reynolds leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Your father was a great man. Respected. Dedicated. But he had a bad habit of sticking his nose where it didn't belong." He tapped a slow rhythm against the desk. "You're making the same mistake." Michael's pulse quickened. "A mistake," he repeated, his voice level. "Like looking into an empty coffin?" Reynolds didn't flinch, but something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of something Michael couldn't quite place. Then, the chief sighed, rubbing his temple as if this conversation was nothing more than an inconvenience. "You think you're uncovering some grand conspiracy, Michael, but you don't understand what you're walking into," Reynolds said. "Your father, he was given a choice. He could have walked away." His gaze hardened. "He didn't." Michael felt a slow chill creep up his spine. "Walked away from what?" Reynolds hesitated. Then, in a voice so low it barely registered, he said, "He found something he shouldn't have." Michael clenched his fist. "And now he's gone." Reynolds didn't confirm or deny it. He just stared. The silence in the room thickened. Shadow let out a quiet growl, his body tense, his amber eyes locked onto Reynolds like he could see something Michael couldn't. Michael shifted slightly, testing the distance between himself and the door. "Where is he?" he demanded. Reynolds sighed again, shaking his head. "It's too late, son." That was the last thing Michael heard before the lights flickered, and the gunshot rang out. Instinct took over. Michael dove to the side, rolling behind a filing cabinet as the bullet embedded itself in the wood paneling where he had been standing. Shadow barked, lunging forward, but Reynolds was already moving, reaching for something under his desk. Michael yanked his sidearm from its holster. "Don't," he shouted. Reynolds froze, his hand hovering over a drawer. For the first time, his expression cracked. Not with fear, but something eerily close to regret. "You should have left it alone," he murmured. Michael's chest heaved. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Tell me where he is." Another beat of silence. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, Reynolds lifted his hands, palms facing outward. "You want to know the truth?" His voice was quiet now, almost pitying. "Fine." Michael's grip on the gun didn't waver. Reynolds exhaled. "He's alive." Michael's breath caught. A part of him had suspected it, had clung to the sliver of hope that the empty coffin meant something other than death. But hearing it out loud nearly knocked the air from his lungs. "Where?" His voice was raw, barely above a whisper. Reynolds tilted his head. "You already have the answer." Michael's mind raced. The USB drive. His father's hidden files. Whatever was on that device held the key to everything. Reynolds' gaze flickered toward the door, and Michael saw it before it happened, the subtle shift in his shoulders, the slight tension in his stance. Reinforcements. They were coming. Michael made a choice. He moved first. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the edge of the desk and flipped it over, sending papers and coffee cups flying. Reynolds cursed, reaching for his gun, but Michael was faster. A single shot rang out, shattering the window behind him. Shadow lunged. Reynolds barely had time to react before the German shepherd tackled him, teeth sinking into the fabric of his sleeve, yanking him to the ground. Michael didn't wait to see what happened next. He bolted for the door, Shadow releasing Reynolds and following close behind. The hallway was empty, for now, but the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the far end of the station. Michael sprinted toward the back exit, shoving through a side door just as voices shouted behind him. Rain hammered against his skin as he hit the pavement, the cold night swallowing him whole. Shadow kept pace beside him, his breath heavy but steady. Michael didn't stop running. Not until he reached his car. He threw open the door, Shadow leaping inside before he peeled away from the station, tires screeching against wet asphalt. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, his heart a hammer against his ribs. His father was alive. Somewhere out there, Henry Lawson was breathing, waiting, and Michael was going to find him. The city sprawled beneath Michael as he drove, the headlights cutting through the thickening fog like searchlights, illuminating the unknown. His mind was a maelstrom of questions, of impossible truths, each piece of the puzzle fitting together in ways that defied logic. His father had faked his own death. And yet, the more Michael thought about it, the more it felt inevitable. The man he had known, the man he had trusted, Henry Lawson had always been a creature of secrets. But why? The answer lingered just beyond his reach, a shadow in the periphery of his understanding. As the car veered off the main highway and into the winding back roads that led to nowhere in particular, Michael's thoughts drifted back to Shadow, sitting silently beside him. The dog had been his father's companion, a partner in crime of sorts, guarding the secrets Henry had carried for so long. Now it was Shadow who had led Michael to the truth, or at least, closer to it. The rain fell heavier, turning the streets into rivers, the headlights making everything shimmer with an eerie glow. The old farmhouse Michael had been driving toward stood at the edge of a hill, isolated, its windows dark and silent. He parked in the gravel lot, his muscles tight, every instinct screaming that this place held the answers. Shadow leapt from the car before he even had the door open, his nose already twitching at the scent in the air. Michael followed, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to expect here, only that his father's disappearance was no accident. The door creaked open with ease, the hinges groaning in protest as Michael stepped inside. It was an old, forgotten place. Dust filled the air, and the musty smell of long-unused furniture greeted him. The house was bare, save for a few scattered pieces, a faded armchair in the corner, a cracked mirror on the wall. But it wasn't the state of the house that caught Michael's attention. It was the presence in the air, the feeling of someone waiting just out of sight. "Father!" Michael's voice was tentative, hesitant. Silence. But then, a figure stepped into view. Henry Lawson. He was thinner than Michael remembered, his face weathered with time and something darker. His eyes, those familiar eyes, were sharp and calculating, but there was a weariness there, too, a heaviness that spoke of years spent hiding from the very world he had once protected. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Shadow stood at Michael's side, watching his father, the low growl in his throat a warning. Henry's lips twitched into something that could have been a smile. "You found me," he said quietly, almost as if he were surprised. Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Why?" The question hung in the air between them, thick with all the emotions Michael had carried with him since his father's death, the anger, the confusion, the betrayal. "Why fake your death? Why leave me with all the lies?" Henry stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, but it only made Michael feel more disconnected. This man, this stranger standing before him, was no longer the father he had known. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Henry said, his voice rough, like he had been talking to no one for a long time. "I never wanted you involved in this, Michael. You don't know what it was like, what I had to do." Michael shook his head, his pulse racing. "What you had to do? What about me? What about the years I've spent thinking you were gone?" Henry's eyes softened for a moment, but it quickly disappeared. "I had no choice. No choice but to disappear. The people I was up against, they didn't leave room for mistakes. And if they thought I was dead, they'd leave me alone." He paused, looking out the window at the rain. "They didn't count on you. You never should have found me." But Michael wasn't listening. His mind was still reeling from the revelation. Who are these people? What did you uncover? Henry's expression grew darker. I can't tell you everything. You don't have the clearance for it. Michael's fists clenched. I don't care about clearance. My father is alive, and I need to know why you disappeared, why you left me in the dark. The silence between them stretched again. Henry didn't look at him, his gaze fixed on something far off, something Michael couldn't see. Finally Henry spoke, his voice quiet but final. There are some things in this world that need to stay buried, Michael. Some secrets that, if they come to light, could bring the whole system down. You think your father was just a cop? No. I was more than that. I was part of something bigger. And it wasn't just the law I was protecting. Michael took a step back, his mind whirling. What does that mean? What did you get yourself involved in? Henry's gaze flicked to him, his eyes sharp. The truth is dangerous, Michael. I protected you by keeping you out of it. But now that you've found me... He paused, swallowing. There's no going back. The weight of his words settled like a storm cloud, darkening the room. Shadow growled low in his throat, sensing the tension, the danger that Michael had only begun to understand. For the first time in years, Michael felt the sharp sting of loss, the loss of a father who had been a stranger in ways he couldn't yet grasp. He had found his father, but in doing so, he had uncovered a truth he wasn't ready for. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before Michael spoke again. His voice was quieter now, more steady, as he met his father's gaze. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, he said, the words heavy with years of pain. But I'll find out the truth. No matter what it costs me. Henry's face softened just a fraction, as if he had been expecting this, but he said nothing in reply. Instead, he turned away, walking toward the dim light that flickered from the back of the house. Come with me, he said softly. Michael hesitated, but something in him, something deep inside, knew that this was the moment that would define everything. Not just his father's life or the tangled web of lies, but his own future. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew one thing for sure, there was no turning back now. With a deep breath, Michael followed him into the darkness.